Welcome back to those conversations on the Decalogue. We are here at what we are going with as the fifth commandment, because we've decided to go with the Lutheran breakdown because we're all Lutherans. So, we win. But no one pushed back. It was an
I was
easy
going to
decision.
say this way back when. I believe it's also the Roman Catholic breakdown.
Yeah.
What Luther did was he just took the breakdown that was in use at the time and brought it over.
Yeah, for the most part, I'm fine with it until we get down to 9 and 10. You're like, this seems really ridiculous, but we'll get there.
I won't be here for those.
we'll get there. But here we are at this one seems simple. You shall not murder. I mean, This is one even the atheists agree with. I mean, everybody agrees with this one, right? I mean,
that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
I mean, most all religions would be like, yeah. I think we can.
I'd say mostly with 5 and 7 in our numbering, most people are like, yeah, okay. I probably shouldn't steal your car. I might want to, but I probably shouldn't. I probably shouldn't just murder you.
Kind of all of these. I mean, there's not a lot of societies or religions where like lying is a virtue.
No, I mean one of the big arguments is for common morality is that most societies, whether Christian or not, throughout the world have adopted some form of morality that reflects the second table of the Decalogue.
Yeah. So, I mean, is that just it? I mean, is this going to be a 2-minute video, Chad? You got anything, real, like insightful in the Hebrew there? I mean, there's 4 words. So got a lot to
work with. Even less in Hebrew. There's 2 in Hebrew. Yeah. Yeah. The next 3 commandments are not very wordy. They each have 2 words in the Hebrew.
It's almost like he thinks that you're going to understand what this means.
Very little simply. Explanation required. Yeah,
of
course, lo tirtzach. That's it. That's in the Hebrew.
Jesus comes along and says, "You don't understand what this means at all."
Yeah. Let me flesh this out a little bit more for you. Yeah, well, I do think there's a couple of things that should be said that might clarify a little bit. One is that this particular verb, ratzak, is it doesn't mean, as some of the older translations had it, it doesn't mean to kill. It's referring to a very specific kind of killing. So for instance, never in the Old Testament is God the subject of this particular verb, but God is the subject of other verbs for kill, such as harag, but not this one. So I think that clarification needs to be made. And also, I've heard this, and at one point, before I knew better, I actually said it myself, that this particular verb is only used in reference to illegal bloodshed, to what we call murder. But that's not strictly the case either, because when you get to the sections in the Torah, for instance, where it talks about establishing the cities of refuge for someone who's killed somebody else, and then they run to the city of refuge until there could be a trial. So you have just accidental killing. Well, it so happens that this particular verb is used there as well. So it is only used in reference to the killing of a human being, but sometimes that killing is what we call murder, and sometimes it's what we call accidental homicide, or accidental killing, whatever you want to call it. So it does kind of have that ambiguity to it. But in the commandments, of course, what it's prohibiting is what we call murder. And one more thing I'll add, just kind of from an Old Testament perspective. The 4th chapter of Genesis, when you get to Cain and Abel, is often referred to, for instance, by the early rabbis as a great illustration of just why murder is as evil as it is. They'll use the story of Cain and Abel because when Cain kills Abel, God says to him that the voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And what the rabbis would point to is that the word for blood is actually in the plural there. They would take that opportunity, as they often did with any kind of little minutia of the Hebrew text, to point out that Cain didn't just kill Abel. The reason the plural is used there is because Cain killed Abel as well as all of his potential descendants.
Yeah.
That was their way of pointing to just how horrible it was to take someone else's life through murder, because you're not just killing that particular person, but that person could have had a son, a daughter,
killing their history.
Children. So what's that?
You're killing their history.
Yeah, you're killing all that potential history that could come from that. So the rabbis would say that basically Cain killed half of the world's population that could have come from his offspring. So that was their way of accenting that. And of course, when you get to a little bit later in Genesis, around the time of the flood, God says that anyone who sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. So you have the death penalty attached to this particular commandment as well, as you do to other commandments like honor your father and your mother. Those were all death penalty punishments for breaking these commandments.
Yeah, and some of them are acted on more consistently than others, right? As we've talked about this before, where
right.
I feel like there's a lot of dishonoring of fathers and mothers that has taken place throughout the history of the world, but not a lot of stonings for it.
Yeah,
you know, so this is something like, even as parents love their children, they're probably not like taking this before the priest, like, listen, this kid's out of control, I say we stone him.
They may want to at times, but it probably didn't happen very often.
That didn't happen very often. Murder, on the other hand, you know, someone murders your brother, you might be taking that up with the authorities for sure. So I mean, and I think we even talked about this, and we'll get there in the next one. I mean, even the adultery one's the same way. You don't see a ton of this happening. It's almost like you're allowed to. This is an allowable penalty for it, but it's not always enacted, or that you don't have to enact it. But what's interesting about you shall not murder. So this is one of the conflicts you'll hear. Some certain in the Reformation, or in the Radical Reformation, you had people taking things like this. Well, I mean, you can't go be a soldier then. Can't go serve in the military.
Well, if you see it just as taking another life for any reason, that certainly, I mean, that limits self-defense, that limits serving in the military, that probably in modern culture limits being a police officer for fear that you might have to subdue somebody, and in subduing them, you end their life.
You might be able to. Yeah, you might be able to pull some of this stuff from some things that Jesus says, where you're like, "Ooh, I think I could take that and make it, mean that I couldn't do this, that, or the other." You can't get it from here, just simply based on the context in which this commandment is given, and God is having these same people form an army and go and take land from other people, involving, I mean, loads of bloodshed. So, I mean, that interpretation won't work for this.
I'd be interested to hear Chad speak to this. You could see that one of two ways, that he's telling them not to kill each other, right? That this is a law that's given to the nation of Israel for the nation of Israel. So don't kill each other. But this doesn't necessarily apply to my sending you into battle to kill Gentiles. Or it simply just means murder. I mean, don't actually, and then you're kind of stuck with the definition of the difference between what does it mean to kill and what does it mean to commit murder, which I don't think there's a universal sort of defining line out there on that one. Yeah,
I mean, contextually, basically God is saying you can only kill people that I give you permission to kill.
Right.
I mean, because we had the death penalty all over the place in the Old Testament. And I mean, there's a distinction that's made when they finally get to the promised land as to which Gentiles they can take out, right? So those that are living within the borders of the promised land, no mercy is to be shown to them. They are all to be just basically executed. But if there is a city outside of the promised land that, for instance, wants to have some sort of peace treaty with Israel, he's fine with that. The city is to be spared, the people are to be spared, but within the geographical boundaries of the promised land, all of those inhabitants are to be killed because they had this generational pollution of the land. So yeah, that distinction comes into play when you get into Joshua.
Yeah. It's interesting, Danny. I don't know if you brought it up at the beginning of the show or as we were talking before the show, but Christ sort of codifies this, as you fast forward in the future, it becomes obvious to him that people are sort of hanging on the fringes of what this means, right? They're saying, well, I've obviously fulfilled the law. And then I'm sure quoting all the commandments that they fulfilled since they were young, right? And including this one. And he's
probably especially this one.
Probably especially this one.
You think like every confirmation class you teach, you're talking to kids, they're like, oh, wow. I got that one.
I got that one.
Easy. One commandment.
Thou shalt not steal, and they're like remembering the comic book. Or, the Playboy that they possibly pilfered from the drugstore.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Scott. Because what Jesus does is he does this with two commandments. He does it with "Thou shalt not murder" and "Thou shalt not commit adultery," which are two commandments that a whole lot of people can say. Did it? So he takes the two commandments that you are most likely to be able to puff up your chest about. The 2 commandments you're going to be like, if I could find someone who's murdered someone, or if I could find someone who committed adultery, obviously I'm more righteous. I'm more righteous than somebody, right? And so, it's no accident that Jesus comes in and says, let me tell you a little bit about 2 commandments, and I'm going to use the 2 commandments that
talk about hate and lust.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about hate and
lust. Every dude in the room is like,
uh-oh.
And
my record.
And what you end up finding out is that you shall not murder and you shall not commit adultery are not just they're not the 2 commandments that a whole bunch of people have kept, but they're actually the 2 commandments that everyone breaks all the time.
Well, yeah, you notice that he doesn't necessarily have to clarify coveting. Right. Because I'm sure there aren't tons of people walking around ever saying, well, I've never wanted my neighbor's car.
Right.
Or, I'm living in this 1,000 square foot piece of crap and he's in this 3,500 square foot mansion. I've never desired to trade lives with them.
Right. Or I've never lied.
Yeah. Or I've never lied. Or I've never stolen.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you just on the surface of that, take that down to like failing to return something that you borrowed or, from your parents or intellectual property or whatever, nobody is generally that sanctimonious about that.
Digital music was a great leveler.
In class once argue against me that it wasn't wrong, which was hilarious. And I promptly walked up to his desk where his Apple MacBook Pro was, and shut the screen and picked it up off his desk and went and put it on the podium and just kept teaching as he was like,
that's mine. You took my property.
Mine. That was yours? I thought we were all living in one blessed community here. Share and share alike. It was great.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, Paul, maybe you could jump in on this. How does Jesus then take thou shalt not murder and then just obliterate everybody with this commandment?
Yeah, so he moves it from simply being an external act, right,
to what it is.
I guess in many ways, kind of doesn't Luther do this in his lectures on Genesis, where he talks about before Eve actually took the fruit, the deed was done, that she doubt, so that this begins inside
the bondage of the will.
And so it's not, hey, I didn't actually go and kill anyone in their sleep or whatever, therefore I'm good. But that jerk over there, man, that guy, and so he's pulling it all back to where it begins for you, and something that you can't escape. Like, you're not going to come out of this clean.
Yeah, it almost seems like Jesus says that murder is that hatred is equal to murder, and what hatred is sort of, you can sort of boil it down to wishing somebody wasn't. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, so like hating somebody is to wish that person was not.
Well, again,
right?
You're wishing to end their history. Right.
And so, like, if there's somebody in your life where, like, I wish that person was not around. I wish that person did not exist. Yeah. Even if you don't go in that existence, if you just think it would be better if they didn't exist, this is what hate is. And in this act, he says, well, that's murder. I mean, you've murdered them in your heart, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole other positive side to this too that Luther brings out in the Catechism. He says we should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on, but help and serve him in every physical need or every bodily need.
One of the translations was help and defend him in every bodily need.
Yeah,
and I think that Luther bringing that in sort of brings in the idea that it's actually okay, even physically, to help defend your neighbor if it comes down to that. That this is not referring to simply the idea that physical harm. Now, I would say, let me clarify. Physical harm is always a result of the fact that we are sinners who live in a sinful world, one way or another, right? And so it's never, completely unsin. That sin's not involved when any kind of killing happens, because anytime death occurs, sin is right there, right? but at the same time, they're part of serving your neighbor could be to defend them and to like actually defend them in sort of the physical sense of that word.
Yeah. I've had this happen to me before, where I did the sinful thing where I got in an altercation with in the middle of a street in Arizona. Because somebody
we
was
need more context.
Actually, it's a crazy story that he should not tell on the YouTube video, but it's a good story.
I will. But yeah, anyway, I was about to get ended, and then my neighbor, in this case, somebody that didn't know me but was near me, decided that he would make sure I didn't get ended in this particular thing. And was there's always sin involved. In some ways, like if you see two guys and they're like in a fist fight, you don't have to wonder. I wonder if there's any sin that occurred to make this happen. Like, obviously so, right? I mean, there's sin involved. War is the same way. I mean, in some ways, there is no such thing as a just war in the sense that there's no war that exists where everything is pure. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a war in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're talking about in the, you're now in the realm, the civil realm, and within the civil realm, you're guided by more than just the Decalogue. Things get more specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
The laws, we've got, literally hundreds of thousands of laws in the books in this country, and they get more and more specific. And that's a manifestation of, God working through civil government to try to keep things in order. But at the same time, in that realm, there's such things as like justifiable homicide and everything, where you could be, seen as completely innocent for having committed even what would otherwise be categorized as a murder.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that sin's not involved in the whole thing. It is. I mean, the fact that death occurs is proof positive that sin is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then as we've brought out in all these commandments, you have the eschatological reality of the day is coming. This is going to be true where there will be no murder, right? You shall
That's
not
right.
murder.
Yeah.
You shall not murder.
The day is coming where there will be no killing, justified or not.
Right.
And
yeah,
which is last a lot longer than I thought we were going to.
That's pretty good. Yeah, which is great. I mean, because murder. I mean, when you hear a story of murder, usually it's horrible, and you're like, man, and you do feel like something extremely unjust has occurred. Like someone just went out and like killed this other person. Like what is this? And so
I really like Jed's explanation for Cain and Abel.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're the blood is crying out to you, right? This, and I'd say even if it were justified, that's why it's such a serious thing to take a life, justified or not. Like that person as they exist here on this earth, their future is gone and their future history is gone. And that can mean like possible descendants, grandchildren. I mean, just on and on and on.
Well, this is why
this is serious.
Yeah. And this is why when we hear about someone young, whether they're murdered or just die, if someone dies young, we feel like that is a larger tragedy than when someone dies when they're older, because we feel like they've been ripped off. Like
the only thing that makes us do that calculus is the fact that they would have had more time to create more history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You already had some of that time.
What we end up doing is that's why I think we grieve so much over the death of the young, is we bury the future instead of burying the past.
Yeah.
And with an older person, they had 70, 80 years, whatever. At least they had a past, but
they had a good run.
Yeah. But with kids, it's like they're cut off from any future.
Yeah. And so God says this is not a good thing, and something that the people that he has claimed as his own, this will not be something that they engage in. So, all right. Well, we hinted at adultery a little bit. We'll probably have a lot of similar things to say about it, but apparently we can make a decently long video on these things. So
boy, that's just a real shocker.
Yeah, so we'll be back here with You Shall Not Commit Adultery.